I came home to find my car clamped on my own property thanks to our power-hungry HOA president, Linda Wilson. But she had no idea she was messing with a Superior Court judge who just uncovered her $42,000 0-cents neighborhood scam. What would you do when faced with a tyrant who's breaking the very laws they claim to enforce? Comment below where you're watching from. I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto Maple Lane. 3 neighbors stood in my driveway pointing at my car. My stomach dropped as I pulled up behind them. What could possibly be happening now? "Tom Hiddleston, they got your car too," called Mrs. Laura, wringing her hands. Her family ran the best Indian restaurant in town, and she always brought me samosas when I helped her with I parked my other car, an old Subaru I kept for bad weather, and hurried over. It was a bright orange metal boot locked tight around my Tesla's front wheel. A hot pink paper flapped under the windshield wiper. The bold black letters screamed, "Parking violation $350, 0 cents. Removal fee $115, 0 cents. Vehicle parked in unauthorized." "This has to be a mistake," I said, snatching the paper. "This is my house, my driveway." I had been a judge for 15 years, but I still believed in staying calm and checking facts before jumping to conclusions. That approach had kept me sane through hundreds of cases where people shouted and cried in my courtroom, but right now my heart was racing. I could feel my face getting hot. "Linda Wilson was here with 2 men about an hour ago," explained Mr. Jennifer from next door. He leaned on his cane, shaking his head. "She had some kind of official-looking paper. Said your car wasn't supposed to be parked there because of some rule about the extended part of your driveway not being approved." I looked down at where my Tesla sat on the newer concrete section I'd added last month to make room for both my vehicles. I'd filed all the proper paperwork with the county, paid for all the permits, and had everything inspected. Twice. "She's targeting everyone lately," whispered Mrs. Rodriguez, glancing nervously across the street. "Last week she left a $200 0-cents fine because my son's basketball hoop was 2 inches too tall." I followed her gaze to the 2-story colonial where Linda Wilson lived. And there she was, peering through her pristine white blinds, phone held up like she was taking pictures. When our eyes met, the blinds snapped shut. "I'm going to talk to her," I said. "Be careful," Mrs. Laura warned. "Brian says she's been recording all her conversations to use against people." Brian was Linda's husband, a quiet man who always looked like he wanted to disappear. I'd seen him at community meetings, sitting behind Linda, never speaking unless she nodded at him first. I smoothed down my suit jacket and took 3 deep breaths. In court I never showed anger. I wouldn't start now. This had to be a misunderstanding that could be fixed with a calm conversation. As I crossed the street, I mentally reviewed the HOA rules I'd memorized when I bought my house 5 years ago. There was nothing about driveway extensions being forbidden. In fact, 3 other houses on our street had them. I rang the doorbell, waiting with my hands clasped in front of me. The door opened a crack. Linda's perfectly made-up face appeared. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. "Tom Hiddleston," she said, not opening the door any wider. "I assume you're here about the parking violation." The fact that she used my title meant she knew exactly who I was and what I did for a living. This wasn't ignorance. This was deliberate. "Linda, there seems to be a mistake. My car is parked in my own driveway. The extension was approved by the county last month." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The county doesn't make the rules for Maple Lane Estates. The Homeowners Association does, and the Architectural Committee, which I chair, never approved your driveway extension. Section 8. Paragraph 3 of our bylaws clearly states that all exterior modifications must receive written approval." "I submitted the request forms in April," I said, fighting to keep my voice even. "I have copies with the receipt stamp." "The committee denied that request," Linda said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You should have received notification. Perhaps it got lost in the mail." I knew she was lying. I had the approval email saved on my phone, but something told me not to show my cards just yet. "I'll need to see the committee's written denial," I said. Linda's smile tightened. "All official records can be requested through the proper channels." There's a form on our website. Processing takes 10 to 14 business days. Until then, the boot stays on, and the fine increases by $50.00 each day it remains unpaid. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Brian at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched as he stared at a laptop. He glanced up, and the look in his eyes surprised me. It wasn't the blank stare I expected, but something closer to shame. He quickly looked away when Linda turned toward him. "Brian, could you bring me the Wilson file?" she called. As Brian shuffled papers, I noticed something odd on their dining room wall. A large whiteboard with all the neighbors' names listed in neat rows. Next to each name were dollar amounts and dates. Rodriguez, $200.00 5/12. Laura, $175.00 4/30. Jennifer, warning ramp 5/15. It was a tracking system for violations. My name had just been added, with the highest amount of all. "Here's a copy of our current bylaws," Linda said, handing me a thick document through the door crack. "Pay special attention to the amendments from last quarter. The board has implemented stricter enforcement policies." I took the packet, noticing the date on the cover, March 2023. That was new. The last official bylaws I'd seen were from 2020. "When were these changes voted on?" I asked. "I don't recall receiving notice of a special meeting." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "We sent emails to everyone. Again, perhaps you should check your spam folder." She started closing the door. "The fine payment portal is on the website. Good day, Tom Hiddleston." The door shut firmly in my face. Through the window, I saw Linda walk to the whiteboard, smiling as she picked up a red marker and circled my name. Walking back to my driveway, I flipped through the packet she'd given me. Something didn't add up. The paper felt different from official HOA documents I'd received before. My neighbors were still waiting, watching anxiously. "What did she say?" asked Mrs. Rodriguez. I looked up at them, then back at Linda's house, where she was now taking photos of my clamped car from her front window. "She said I broke the rules," I replied slowly, an idea forming. "But I think Linda Wilson is the one breaking laws, and she has no idea who she's picked a fight with." I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the boot, the violation notice, and my driveway from multiple angles. Then I sent a text to my clerk at the courthouse. "Need to pull county property records from Maple Lane Estates, especially HOA filings from the past 3 years. Urgent." As my phone buzzed with a reply, I looked at my worried neighbors and felt a strange sense of determination. How many people had Linda bullied with these tactics? How much money had she collected through these questionable fines? How many people had Linda bullied with these tactics? How much money had she quietly collected through these questionable fines? "Mrs. Laura, do you still have your violation notices?" I asked. "And Mr. Jennifer, did you keep any documentation about your ramp situation?" They both nodded. "Good," I said. "I think we all need to compare notes." I glanced back at Linda's house, where the blinds were still slightly parted. Something told me our HOA president had been writing her own rules for quite some time, and I needed to know exactly how deep this went. This wasn't the first time Linda Wilson had made my life miserable. The sight of that orange boot on my wheel brought back a flood of memories about how the neighborhood had shifted since she took over the HOA just 3 months ago. It all started the day after I had my solar panels installed. I was drinking my morning coffee when a loud, aggressive knock rattled the front door. There stood Linda, her perfectly colored blonde hair somehow unmoving despite the wind, clutching a thick binder labeled "Covenant Violations" in bold red letters. "Tom Hiddleston, these solar panels are completely unacceptable," she said, not knowing I was actually a judge. "I just went by Tom around the neighborhood. They're an eyesore. They diminish the visual appeal of Maple Lane Estates." I took a deep breath to stay calm. "Linda, I filed all the proper paperwork. The HOA approved these panels 3 weeks ago." I showed her the signed documents from the previous HOA president, Mr. Jenkins, who had retired and moved to Florida. She snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them with narrowed eyes. "This approval is from the old board," she scoffed. "Things have changed. I'll need to bring this up at our next meeting." 2 days later, I received a violation notice for $500.00, citing unapproved exterior modifications. I immediately appealed the fine, attaching all my documentation. The HOA approval, county permits, and even photographs of 3 other homes in the neighborhood with similar panels. My appeal was denied. The Architectural Committee has reviewed your case and determined that your solar installation does not meet current aesthetic standards. It was signed by Linda and her 3 closest allies, who now made up the majority of the 5-person board. I paid the fine to avoid more trouble, hoping it would end there. It didn't. The following week, Linda cited me for my row of bushes being 2 inches taller than the approved garden height. Then it was my mailbox, which was apparently non-conforming, even though it was the same model the previous owners had used for 15 years. One evening, while walking my golden retriever Cooper, I noticed something strange. Linda wasn't enforcing the rules equally. She seemed to be targeting specific homeowners while completely ignoring similar violations elsewhere. The Jennifers had installed a small wheelchair ramp for their teenage son, who'd recently been in an accident. Linda called it an unsightly structure and warned of fines. Meanwhile, her friend Diane had built a much larger stone staircase with no repercussions at all. I started quietly talking to neighbors. The Rodriguez family had been fined for leaving their children's bicycles visible in the driveway. The Lauras weren't allowed to park their catering van overnight, despite it being the source of their family's income. Yet Linda's adult son had parked his rusty project car in their front yard for weeks without a word from the HOA. "She's running this place like her personal kingdom," Mrs. Laura whispered one day as we stood near the community mailbox. "We're afraid to speak up, because she just increases the fines if you question her." Something wasn't right. I had presided over dozens of property disputes in my courtroom, and I recognized the signs of someone abusing their authority. Normally, I kept my profession private. I didn't want special treatment or for neighbors to feel like they couldn't relax around me, but now my legal instincts were screaming. Late at night, after long days in court, I began researching our HOA's legal standing. I pored over founding documents, bylaws, and California's laws regarding homeowners associations. What I discovered disturbed me. Many of the rules Linda was enforcing weren't listed in our official bylaws. One weekend, I drove to the county records office and requested the original filed documents for our subdivision. The clerk recognized me from court and brought them promptly. I compared them to the updated guidelines Linda had circulated in her quarterly newsletter. There were subtle but significant differences. She had essentially rewritten our community's rules, enforcing a stricter version that had never been approved by vote. I began gathering evidence. Quietly, I took photographs of selectively enforced violations. I started a spreadsheet tracking fines. I made copies of every communication the HOA sent out. I also noticed something else. HOA bank statements used to be published in our quarterly newsletters. Until Linda took over, that transparency had vanished. When I installed my driveway extension last month, I followed every proper channel. I submitted detailed plans, got county permits, and even had the utility companies mark underground lines before pouring the concrete. The work was done professionally. It matched the existing driveway perfectly. Linda had been out of town that week, so the acting HOA secretary gave me provisional approval. The night before my car was booted, I'd overheard Linda and Brian arguing by the community pool. "I don't care what the county approved," she hissed. "That driveway extension is not happening on my watch. Nobody gets to change anything unless I say so." Brian had spotted me and quickly tried to change the subject. Linda never noticed me standing there. Now, as I stood in my driveway, staring at the clamped Tesla, everything clicked into place. This wasn't about the rules or neighborhood aesthetics. This was about power and control. Linda was using the HOA as a weapon to punish those who didn't bow to her. I pulled out my phone and took more photos of my car, making sure to clearly capture the property lines, the curb, and the new concrete. Then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The boot had scratched the Tesla's custom rim. That wasn't just enforcement, that was property damage. As I zoomed in to document the scratch, a text popped up from an unknown number. "Not just your car. Check your solar panels." I looked up at the roof and felt my stomach drop. 3 of the solar panels were visibly cracked, as if someone had thrown something at them. Who would do this? And who sent the warning? Just then, Brian Wilson hurried past with his small terrier. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but as he turned the corner, something fell from his jacket pocket and landed on my lawn. I picked it up. A folded note. Linda has gone too far. More of us want to help than you know. Meeting tomorrow at the Laura's. I looked back at the damaged car, then up at the vandalized panels. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. With my legal knowledge and growing community support, it was time to take a stand against Linda's reign of HOA terror. But first, I needed to know exactly how deep her scheme went. The orange boot on my Tesla's wheel seemed to mock me as the rain began to fall. This wasn't about a parking violation anymore. This was about Linda Wilson believing she could bully anyone she pleased with a clipboard, a smile, and a fake set of rules. And I was done letting it slide. The violation notice crumpled in my fist as I stormed across the street, my judge's robe still on from court. I hadn't even had time to change. My finger jabbed the doorbell 3 times. Through the decorative glass, I could see Linda Wilson's silhouette moving slowly, deliberately, making me wait in the rain. When she finally opened the door, her fake smile didn't reach her eyes. "Judge Hiddleston, what a surprise visit. Is something wrong?" Her voice dripped with false concern as her eyes flicked to my soaked robe with visible satisfaction. "You know exactly what's wrong, Linda. You put a boot on my car. Parked in my driveway." I held up the soggy violation paper. "Explain this, immediately." Her smile widened as she leaned against the doorframe. "Well, if you had attended last month's HOA meeting instead of disappearing into that mysterious job that keeps you so busy, you'd know that all driveway extensions now require pre-approval." She examined her manicured nails as if we were discussing paint swatches. "Your little concrete addition wasn't submitted to the architectural committee. The rules apply to everyone. That extension has been there for 6 weeks," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite my rising anger. "No one said a word until today." "Enforcement takes time," Linda replied with a dismissive wave. "We can't catch everything right away, but rules are rules." Behind her, I spotted her husband, Brian Wilson, appearing in the hallway. Brian was a quiet man who mostly stayed out of HOA business, but I'd always found him to be fair in our few brief exchanges. His eyes widened when he saw me standing there in my judicial robe. "Linda," he whispered, tugging gently at her sleeve, "maybe we should talk about this. Inside." "That's Judge—" "Not now, Brian," Linda snapped, not even turning to face him. "I'm handling a neighborhood violation." Brian's face went pale as he looked between us. He clearly recognized who I was from the courthouse, but Linda remained clueless, or worse. "The fine is $350.00, Linda continued, sliding a freshly printed invoice toward me. "And the boot removal fee is another $150.00, payable to the HOA immediately. If it's not paid within 48 hours, the amount doubles and we begin the process of placing a lien on your property." My jaw nearly dropped. $500 for parking on my own property? This is extortion. "It's enforcement of community standards," she corrected with a smug smile. "Standards you agreed to when you bought your house. Perhaps if you read the covenant like I did, page by page, you wouldn't be in this situation." I took a deep breath. In court, I'd learned that losing your temper never helps your case. "Show me exactly where in the covenant it says I can't park on my own driveway extension." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "Section 7, paragraph 12. All exterior modifications must be approved by the architectural committee." "That's about modifications, not parking," I countered. "And for your information, I did get approval for that extension from the county. I have permits and inspection records, all signed off." "County approval doesn't override HOA requirements," Linda said sharply. "Our covenant supersedes county regulations for aesthetic matters." That statement was so legally incorrect I almost laughed. "Almost." Brian stepped forward again, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Linda, if he has county permits, maybe we should—" "Brian," she hissed, "go check on dinner." Her husband hesitated, then gave me an apologetic look before disappearing back into the house. "Look at what you've done to our street," Linda continued, gesturing toward my home. "That modern-looking car, those ugly solar panels, and now this extra-way driveway, it's bringing down property values. Mrs. Jenkins across the street is already complaining she can't sell her house because the neighborhood is losing its character. I had to bite my tongue not to mention that Mrs. Jenkins was asking $100,000, 0 cents above market value, and had turned down 3 offers herself. Thunder rumbled in the distance as we stood at her doorway, locked in a silent power struggle. My judicial training had taught me to recognize when someone was drunk on authority. And Linda Wilson? She was intoxicated. I changed tactics. "Linda, I understand you're passionate about our neighborhood's appearance. I am too. But there has to be a fair process. Can we discuss this reasonably, perhaps take a look at the actual covenant together?" Her eyes narrowed with suspicion at my sudden shift in tone. "There's nothing to discuss. The violation stands. Pay the fine, follow the rules going forward, and we won't have these problems." From inside the house I heard Brian's voice calling her name again, this time with urgency. She ignored him. "The fine doubles if not paid in 48 hours, she added, already starting to close the door. "And don't even think about removing that boot yourself. That's tampering with HOA property. Comes with an additional $1,000, 0 cents fine." The door slammed in my face, leaving me standing in the increasingly heavy rain. Through the front window I saw Linda and Brian in what appeared to be a heated argument. Brian kept pointing toward the door while Linda shook her head vigorously. As I walked back to my house, soaking wet and seething, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Judge Hiddleston, this is Brian Wilson. Linda doesn't know I'm texting you. She's done this to 7 other families. We need to talk. Meet me at Westside Coffee tomorrow at 7 a.m. I looked back at the Wilsons' house, where the curtain argument seemed to be escalating. Was Brian reaching out as an ally, or was it a trap? Either way, I now knew this wasn't just about my car or my driveway. Linda was running a neighborhood dictatorship, and it was time someone stood up to her, someone who understood the law better than she ever could. Later that evening, just as I was pouring myself a much-needed glass of wine, the doorbell rang. Who could be visiting at 8:30 p.m. on a Tuesday? I peered through the peephole. Brian Wilson stood on my porch, nervously looking over his shoulder, like a man who feared being followed. This was unexpected. "Brian," I asked, opening the door just enough to speak, "is everything okay?" His hands were trembling. "Judge Hiddleston, I need to talk to you. It's about Linda and the HOA. Can I come in, please? I don't want anyone to see me here." I hesitated for a beat, but Brian had never been unkind to me, unlike his wife. I stepped aside and he hurried in. His shirt was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, and his face looked gaunt. A very different man than the polished, silent observer I'd seen at past meetings. "You know who I am?" I said, closing the door behind him. "Yes, of course," he replied. "You just dismissed my speeding ticket last year. I recognized you the day you moved in, but Linda doesn't know what you do for a living." He lowered his voice, even though we were alone. "She thinks you're just another person she can push around." I gestured toward the living room. "Would you like some water?" "No, thank you. I can't stay long. Linda thinks—" "I'm at the hardware store." He pulled out his phone and handed it to me. "Look at these." I scrolled through photos, images of spreadsheets with neighbor names, violation types, dates, and fine amounts. The list was longer than I expected. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. Brian ran his hand through his thinning hair. "Because it's getting worse. And I can't stop her." "Because it's getting worse," Brian said quietly, "and I can't stop her." He looked away for a moment, then continued. "The Rodriguez family, you know them, the kind couple with 3 kids at the end of the street. Linda's threatening them with daily fines if they don't take down the basketball hoop they put up for their son's birthday." I blinked. "That's excessive. It's a basketball hoop." I could still hear the echoes of laughter from just a few days ago. Diego and his friends shooting hoops in the driveway. "It doesn't end there," Brian continued, his words now tumbling out faster. "The Lauras can't park their catering van overnight, even though it's their livelihood. And Mrs. Jennifer, the widow who uses a wheelchair since her stroke, Linda's demanding she remove her wheelchair ramp, says it ruins the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood." My stomach turned. "A wheelchair ramp? That's not just mean-spirited, Brian. That might be illegal under federal accessibility laws." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I've tried reasoning with her. She won't listen. She's high on the power. He leaned in, lowering his voice even further. She keeps a pair of binoculars on the front windowsill, watches everyone, just waits for the tiniest mistake. I glanced outside to the clamped Tesla in my driveway. How long has this been going on? It started small, Brian said, exhaling slowly. 2 years ago when she first became president. A warning here, a fine there. People didn't make a fuss, but now he pulled out an older phone from his coat pocket. This is Linda's personal phone. She left it charging when she went to her book club. Look at these texts. I scrolled through thread after thread. Conversations between Linda and 3 other board members. They joked about residents' financial problems. They mapped out who to target next. They discussed how to quietly revise bylaws without notifying the community. They even boasted about manipulating elections. Has anyone tried to stop her? I asked, now taking careful mental notes. Brian's shoulders slumped. People are scared. The Thompsons spoke up at the last HOA meeting. The next day they got violation notices for 5 different things. Their teenage daughter's car was towed from their own driveway while she was at school. It cost them $275.00 to get it back. That's not enforcement, I said quietly. That's intimidation. Exactly, Brian whispered, and there's more. He looked down, swallowing hard. I think there's something wrong with the HOA's finances. I used to help with the paperwork, but she started shutting me out. Last week I caught a glimpse of a bank statement from an account I didn't recognize. And, I asked, it had over $330.00 in it. I felt the switch flip in my mind, the moment my legal brain stopped seeing this as a neighborhood nuisance and started seeing it as potential fraud. This isn't just about bullying, I said. This could be criminal. Brian looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. Why are you telling me all this now? He stared at his hands. Because when I saw your car clamped today, something snapped. I've been a coward, Tom, letting Linda bully everyone. But you didn't deserve that. No one does. His eyes met mine. Honestly, I think you're the only person who can stand up to her and win. I considered the weight of what he was asking. Getting involved in HOA drama wasn't my style. But this wasn't drama anymore. This was systemic abuse. If what Brian said was true, people's civil rights had been violated. I can't promise anything yet, I said slowly, but I want to learn more. Do you think others would be willing to talk to me? Brian gave a nervous chuckle. Are you kidding? They'd line up around the block. Everyone's just waiting for someone brave enough to lead the charge. I made a decision. Tell them to come to my house tomorrow night at 7. Bring everything. Violation notices, fine receipts, any emails or letters from the HOA. Tell them it's voluntary. Confidential. Brian stood, his face a mixture of relief and panic. What if Linda finds out? Let me worry about that, I said. Right now we need information. I paused. Oh, and Brian, if you can, take photos of those texts and documents on her phone, but only if you can do it safely. He nodded, moving toward the door. Then he stopped. There's something else you should know. Linda has friends at City Hall. She brags about it all the time. I nodded. Thanks for the warning, but remember, I have friends at the courthouse. After Brian left, I stood at the window watching his car disappear into the dark. My clamped Tesla sat in the driveway like a bright orange monument to injustice. I pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Linda Wilson had declared war on the wrong person. Tomorrow night, we'd begin planning our counterattack. But just as I turned away from the window, I caught movement across the street. Linda was standing in her front yard, staring directly at my house, phone pressed to her ear. Had she seen Brian leaving? A chill ran down my spine. She didn't wave. She didn't flinch. She just smiled, slowly, then turned and walked back into her house. The next morning, my kitchen table vanished under a mountain of paperwork. HOA notices, fine letters, email printouts, legal statutes. The orange boots still sat on my Tesla like a taunt. I hadn't slept. Not really. Something kept gnawing at me. Linda had been quoting rules. Rules I didn't remember agreeing to when I bought the house. What if the rules she was enforcing weren't even real? I muttered aloud, rubbing my tired eyes. I need to see the original bylaws, not just the glossy packet she distributes each year. I grabbed my phone. Can you pull the official bylaws for Oakwood Estates HOA on file with the county? Urgent. 2 hours later, Janet texted back. Emailed. Check your inbox. My hand shook as I printed them out. I laid the official county-filed version next to Linda's. The differences were immediate and staggering. Her version included an entire section on aesthetic harmony that didn't exist in the original. There were no restrictions on driveway parking, no language banning basketball hoops, no limitations on solar panels or wheelchair ramp. Many of the fines she'd issued were based on bylaws that had never been legally adopted. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my fury. Brian stood there, holding a thick manila envelope. I brought what you asked for, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Linda's at her weekly spa appointment. She won't be back for hours. Inside the envelope were years of HOA financial records. Brian still had access as treasurer, even though Linda had quietly taken over most duties. She doesn't know I kept copies of everything, he said. His voice felt off. But I was too afraid to rock the boat. We spread the bank statements across my dining room table, and that's when the pattern emerged. The HOA collected roughly $500.00 monthly from each of the 78 homes. That money was meant for landscaping, pool maintenance, and common area upkeep. But then there was a second account, labeled Compliance Revenue. This is where all the fine money goes, Brian explained. Over $42.00 had been collected in just the last year. I felt sick as I flipped through receipts. A kitchen remodel, a luxury cruise, designer handbags, all paid for from the compliance account. She's not just making up rules, I said, the realization hitting me like a gavel. She's stealing from our neighbors. This isn't just HOA overreach, I added. It's fraud. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Elena Rodriguez lit up the screen. Tom, Linda just fined us $500.00 for our son's birthday balloons. Says they're violating the visual harmony rule. We can't afford this. I felt something inside me break. Without saying a word, I pulled out my phone and began photographing every document Brian had brought over. Bank statements, bylaws, email printouts. The more I dug, the worse it got. Linda wasn't just power tripping, she was targeting people. Families who couldn't afford lawyers, immigrants, single parents, elderly residents on fixed incomes, the vulnerable. Look at this pattern, I said to Brian, my finger jabbing the paperwork. The Lauras got fined right after they started their catering business. The Jennifers, right after Mrs. Jennifer's stroke, when they added the ramp. It's like she punishes people for needing help. Brian stared at the table, guilt heavy on his face. She said it was about maintaining property values, he muttered. I believed her at first. But then what? I pressed. He looked up, voice cracking. Last Christmas, I overheard her talking to her sister, bragging, called our HOA her personal ATM. Said it was easy to scare people into paying whatever she demanded. The doorbell rang again. Startled, I shoved the documents under the sofa cushions. It was Elena. Tears streaked her face. Her young son, Diego, peeked out nervously from behind her legs, clutching a deflated balloon. I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Hiddleston, Elena said, voice shaking, but Diego saw you arguing with Mrs. Wilson. Are you in trouble too? I opened the door wider. Come in. As they stepped inside, I knelt in front of Diego. How old are you today, buddy? 7, he whispered, holding up the balloon. But Mrs. Wilson said our decorations make the neighborhood look ugly. My heart shattered. Elena explained, her voice low so Diego wouldn't hear. They'd already been fined for wind chimes, for Diego's bicycle left on the porch, and now for birthday balloons. We're falling behind on our mortgage, she whispered. I'm afraid she'll put a lien on our home. As more neighbors arrived for the meeting, similar stories poured in like a flood. The Mendozas were fined because their grandmother stayed with them for more than 2 weeks. The Clarks got penalized because their newborn baby cried too loudly. Each story was more absurd and more heartbreaking than the last. I stood, pulled the documents back out, and laid them on the dining table. One by one, I explained what Brian and I had uncovered. As the truth took shape, I watched expressions shift, from confusion to disbelief to fury. "She can't do this to us," Mrs. Laura shouted, her husband nodding. "Actually," I said, voice calm but firm, "she can't." I held up the official bylaws. "None of these rules she's been enforcing exist in our legal governing documents, not a single one." Silence filled the room. You could feel it, the turning of the tide. Then I showed them the bank statements. "The fines you've paid didn't go to neighborhood maintenance or landscaping or safety improvements." I turned the page. "They funded Linda Wilson's kitchen remodel, her cruise to Cabo, her shopping sprees. She hasn't just been making our lives miserable," I said, trying to contain the burn in my chest. "She's been stealing from us, every last one of us." Mr. Jennifer wheeled his wife forward. "So what do we do now, Tom?" he asked quietly. "She's got all the power." I smiled for the first time in days. "Not anymore, not when we stand together." As I laid out the plan, board accountability, formal complaints, audits, I noticed Brian glance nervously at his watch. "She'll be home soon," he whispered. "And she always checks the security cameras." That's when it hit me. If Linda was watching that closely, she might already know we were gathering. If she discovered what we'd found, before we could act, we might lose everything. Suddenly, headlights flashed through the front window. A car door slammed. Brian's face turned ghostly pale. "She's back early." I arrived at the community center 30 minutes ahead of time. My pulse pounded in my ears as I arranged the projector, clicked open the folders, and double-checked every tab. Tonight would change everything. The room began filling faster than I expected. Faces I'd never seen at any meeting before were streaming in, whispering, pointing, shaking hands in solidarity. My clamped Tesla had become a symbol. But the truth I was about to show, that would be the bombshell. Brian approached, his hands trembling as he handed me a cup of water. "You sure about this?" he whispered. "Linda's got friends on the town council." I looked over at Mrs. Jennifer, struggling to get her wheelchair through the narrow double doors. Linda had refused to widen. "Truth doesn't care about connections," I said. At exactly 7:00 p.m., Linda strutted in, red blazer, clipboard, that same smug plastic smile. Her expression flickered as she noticed the crowd. 97 residents by my count, the biggest turnout in HOA history. She tapped the microphone 3 times. "Well, this is unexpected," she said. "I'm delighted to see such community involvement. We have a full agenda tonight, starting with flower arrangements." "Point of order," I said loudly, rising to my feet. The room went dead silent. "I believe we need to address some urgent business first." Her eyes narrowed. "You're out of order, Mr. Hiddleston. We follow the agenda here." "That's Judge Hiddleston, actually." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. "And according to Bylaw 53, I continued, any member may request an agenda adjustment with the support of 10 residents. Dozens of hands shot up, her face flushed scarlet. "Fine," she snapped. "You have 5 minutes." I connected my laptop to the projector. "I won't need that long." Slide by slide, I walked them through the real story. The official bylaws filed with the county. No mention of basketball hoops. No ban on birthday balloons. No language prohibiting driveways, solar panels, or wheelchair ramps. Then I pulled up Linda's altered version. Section by section, I highlighted the forgeries. "This is ridiculous," Linda snapped, stepping forward. "These are just clerical differences. Clerical differences that have cost this neighborhood over $40,000 0 cents in fines," I replied, switching to the next slide. Bank statements. Money collected, money unaccounted for. The room erupted. Mr. Laura stood up, waving a stack of documents. "We sold our second van because you said we couldn't park it overnight. My wife has been taking the bus to catering jobs for months." Mrs. Rodriguez shouted over the din. "My kids can't even shoot hoops in our driveway. You threatened to put a lien on our house." Linda banged her gavel. "Order! Order! These accusations are baseless. He's just bitter because his Tesla got clamped." "Am I?" I asked. I clicked the next slide. A First Regional Bank account. created 3 years ago, right after Linda took power. Thousands of dollars every month funneled there instead of into the HOA's community account. Silence. Her face went pale. "That's for special projects," she stammered. "Like your kitchen renovation?" Brian's voice rang from the back. He stepped forward, holding up photos. "Or your vacation to Maui last spring?" "I've kept the receipts, Linda, all of them," Brian said firmly. Linda lunged for her purse. "This meeting is adjourned. Actually," I said, nodding toward the back of the room, "there are some people here who'd like to ask you questions about those special projects." 2 uniformed officers stepped forward, having entered quietly. Linda's eyes widened as she backed toward the exit. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who my brother-in-law is? He's the deputy mayor." I remained calm. "My courtroom has seen plenty of deputy mayor's relatives. The law applies to everyone, Linda." In desperation, she grabbed the HOA laptop. "I'm taking this. All the records are here." Brian stepped forward. "I already backed everything up, Linda. It's over." The officers approached her calmly. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us to answer some questions." As they escorted a sobbing Linda out, she turned to the crowd. "You'll regret this, all of you. Your property values will tank without my leadership." The door closed behind her. Silence fell. Then Mrs. Jennifer rolled her wheelchair forward. "Judge Hiddleston," she said softly, "I've lived here for 15 years. Never once has that woman looked me in the eye. She called my ramp an unsightly contraption and fined me every month." Her voice broke. "What happens now?" I looked around the room. Some neighbors were in tears. Others looked stunned. Many looked hopeful, for the first time in years. "Now," I said, unfolding the official bylaws, "we rebuild. Together." Phones came out, recording everything. The local news would be there within the hour. Brian had tipped them off. By morning, Linda's reign of terror would be front-page news. As the meeting continued into the night, I stepped outside briefly for air. My Tesla still wore its bright orange boot like a badge of honor. I smiled, remembering Linda's face when she realized who she'd been threatening. But the night wasn't over. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won. Linda's not the only one with power in this town. Check your mailbox." Who else was involved in this scheme? How deep did the corruption go? 6 weeks later, I pulled into my driveway, the very spot where my car had been clamped. You won't believe what happened after that HOA meeting. The very next morning, police cars lined our quiet street. 2 officers escorted Linda from her home in handcuffs, while neighbors peeked through their curtains. It turned out the $42,000, 0 cents, was just the beginning. "Judge Hiddleston," called Mrs. Rodriguez, rushing over with her son, Miguel. "We put up our basketball hoop yesterday. The kids are so happy." Her eyes welled with tears. "We were afraid to even plant flowers before." I smiled, thinking back to the days just after our showdown. 3 moving trucks had appeared on our street. Linda's closest allies on the board, the Thompsons, the Clarks, and the Reeds, all suddenly had to relocate for work. Funny how quickly rats abandon a sinking ship. "Did you see the news last night?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, eyes wide. "They interviewed Brian. He showed them everything." I had seen it. Brian Wilson, once Linda's nervous shadow, had become a man with purpose. He turned over years of fake documents, altered bank statements, and even recordings of Linda threatening homeowners. "I was too scared to stand up to her," he admitted on camera. "But seeing Judge Hiddleston fight for our neighborhood gave me courage." My phone buzzed again. A text from District Attorney Henson. "Grand jury just returned indictments, all 4 facing felony charges. Good work, Tom." I hadn't sought this outcome, but justice has many forms. As I grabbed my mail, I noticed the Rodriguez family wasn't the only one embracing freedom. The Laura's catering van now sat proudly in their driveway, their business logo no longer hidden beneath a tarp. The sweet aroma of Mrs. Laura's famous curry drifted through the cul-de-sac. Before Linda's reign, the Lauras had run a thriving catering business. When they refused to pay a made-up commercial vehicle fine, she'd threatened to place a lien on their home. "Judge, Judge!" shouted a young voice. 7-year-old Lily Jennifer wheeled quickly down her new ramp, her mother following with a letter in hand. I walked over to greet them. "We wanted you to be the first to know," said Mrs. Jennifer, her eyes bright with excitement. The neighborhood voted yesterday. I'm the new HOA president." "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. Mrs. Jennifer had been one of Linda's first victims. A wheelchair user since her stroke, she'd needed that ramp. Linda tried to block it, claiming it would lower property values. "We're having a block party this weekend to celebrate the changes," Mrs. Jennifer continued. First official act of the new board was to approve it unanimously. A block party. When was the last time this neighborhood had celebrated anything together? Linda had canceled the annual 4th of July picnic 3 years ago, claiming it created excessive noise and trash. "I have something for you," Mrs. Jennifer said, handing me an envelope with the HOA logo. Inside was a formal apology letter, a refund check for all my violation fees, and a thank you card signed by over 40 neighbors. Just then, a moving truck rumbled down the street and stopped in front of Linda's house. Brian stood outside, directing movers as they loaded boxes. "Brian," I called, "how are you holding up?" He looked different, straighter, stronger, more like the man he was meant to be. "Better than I have in years, Judge Hiddleston. The divorce papers were filed last week." He lowered his voice. "Did you know Linda had secret accounts in the Caymans? Forensic accountants found nearly $200,000, 0 cents siphoned from HOAs all over the county. She's been running this scam for decades." I was shocked but not surprised. A woman walking her golden retriever approached. I recognized her. Hence Rivera, the retired school teacher who lived at the end of the street. "Judge Hiddleston," she said softly. I never spoke up during those horrible meetings. Linda threatened to report my garden as a violation if I did. Said she'd make me tear out my vegetables. She squeezed my hand. "Thank you for giving us our neighborhood back." As I headed inside, my phone rang, a reporter from the local news. "Judge Hiddleston, we're doing a feature on HOA abuse across the county. Your case has inspired homeowners in 12 other communities to audit their boards. Would you care to comment?" I paused. "This isn't about me," I finally said. "It's about remembering that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around." That evening I sat on my porch, watching kids ride bikes up and down the street. The Nangwin family was setting up for their daughter's 16th birthday, something Linda would have shut down in a heartbeat. The Jacksons were installing solar panels just like mine. The Smiths had finally painted their front door the bold red they'd wanted for years. Mrs. Jennifer wheeled up my driveway with a plate of cookies. "First monthly neighborhood meeting is tomorrow night," she said. "Nothing fancy, just coffee and conversation about what we want our community to be." She smiled. "We're lucky to have you, Judge Hiddleston." I looked around at the transformed neighborhood. Children laughing, families chatting across driveways, the soft music from the Nangwin's party filling the air. "I'm just a neighbor who believes in justice," I said, thinking about how far we'd come in 6 weeks. Sometimes standing up to a bully doesn't just solve your own problem, it frees everyone else too. What would you do if your own HOA clamped your car in your driveway and then you found out they were running a $42,000 0 cents scam? That's exactly what happened to me, a Superior Court judge who came home to an orange boot on my Tesla and neighbors terrified into silence. But here's the truth. Bullies only win when good people stay quiet. In today's world, we need to remember that power doesn't always mean right. Sometimes the loudest person at the table is just masking fear. Whether it's an HOA president rewriting rules to feed their ego, or a manager misusing authority at work, abuse only grows in the shadows. So take pictures, document everything. Know your rights, and when the moment comes to speak up, do it with facts, calm resolve, and community behind you, because when one person stands up, others will follow, and bullies will fall. If you've ever faced HOA harassment, legal intimidation, or neighborhood injustice, you're not alone. Follow and subscribe to the HOA Revenge YouTube channel for more real-life stories, legal tips, and powerful comebacks that will leave you cheering. Stand up, speak truth, and remember, justice lives here.